Good morning, everyone. Or if you come from my part of the world, good evening, everyone. It's very good to be here. And I think we've had a great start to what I think is going to be a really great conversation for 3 days. The short answer is it's always about water, and it's never exclusively about water. What I want to do is to run through a few slides to talk about some experiences from South Africa and the region, and show you that what Bob Rae was talking about in his quest for the decolonization of Canada is in fact a global quest. We actually need a decolonization of the world and a massive emancipation of our minds and our paradigms. So I'm going to go through these quite quickly, and I have a small publication which we put at the Canadian Water Network desk, and for those of you who can get a copy, please do, and for those of you who can't, I'll make sure that you get it electronically. And it talks to some of our own efforts in 6 different baskets of how we move knowledge into action as best we can as a science agency, which is never quite interesting, and always interesting but never easy. So this is primarily the issue that we talk to. Margaret talked about chasms. Well, this is the knowledge chasm. That we have the scientific community on one side. When we engage with other people, we go, oh hum, well, we've thought about that ages ago and we have all of the solutions. Well, at the same time, society stands at the other side and said, we've made this public investment in research institutions and academia, and frankly, we're not being served. So we have researchers who are not being heard, society that is not being served, and clearly what we need to do is to bridge the knowledge chasm. Now, we talk about these issues quite a lot. We talk about the issues in various different ways. Inside the research world, we construct for ourselves a wonderful system called the innovation value chain, but we never think of it as circular. We always think of it as linear. That primary knowledge is developed through research, that is worked into something that is a little more applicable through applied science. We then move that into technology development. Then we find a series of facilitators to take this out to market, and that is generally where we stop. But what we need to do, and we need to do this very rapidly, is to complete the circle. Because after the implementation attempts that we all make, we then need to talk about what is the societal experience of this knowledge-based solution that we put out there. Then in turn, how does that advise what the new societal needs are and what the market needs are, and does that ever come back into completing the chain around the research need so that we have an ecosystem that's working? So what we tend to do is that in the world that I'm in, and the world that most of you are, is that we talk about the supply push, and we think that the supply push will solve all of the problems. It never does. And when you start talking to other people from other sectors, and the societal stakeholders at large, you then talk about what the demand pull is, and there is a mismatch between the demand pull and the supply push. And what we actually need is this convection that makes all of this work together in an interesting way. Now, we could talk for many hours on this subject, and I'm sure a lot of you have deliberated about this for a long time. But one of the things that it does bring into play is exactly the issues that were raised earlier. That the solution to many of the problems facing the world, whether they're labeled water or energy or nutritional security or public health or general security, lie at the very heart of that problem is how you deal with the water issue and the water management issue. In turn, when we're looking at the water problems, there are never problems in water that can be solved by the water community exclusively. So this year at the World Economic Forum, for the very first time, the Global Risk Report says that the #1 economic risk in the world today is in fact the water crisis. That our ability or inability to deal with the water crisis will determine what the future economy is going to look like for the world and the range of implications that go around it. Now for us in the public space, this is a magnificent move, because what it says is that this conversation we've been having in the public space, primarily in academia, is now getting noticed and becoming a boardroom conversation, and hopefully a conversation with governments around the world as well. So what I want to knock through in the next 2 slides are just 2 examples One of these examples is by design of how knowledge has made a serious movement way beyond knowledge into actual action that has helped to transform the lives of people, and another one where it was completely outside that design. Now, I'll be surprised if you heard about this example, because this is quite far away from South Africa, but Working for Water is one of the major public works programs in democratic South Africa. And what its origins is a set of scientific experiments by South African scientists together with their international partners, something that we all know because it's come on the back of the IPCC reports through all of its iterations, is the impact of invasive aliens on stream flow in different parts of the world. So using that scientific knowledge, combining that scientific knowledge to South Africa in 1995, which was an incredibly unequal society. It's still quite an unequal society, but we've made several improvements. Talking about very large-scale unemployment, primarily black unemployment. Talking about a fairly low skills base, primarily in the black communities, because this would surprise you, but the architecture of apartheid was deep and very invasive, to the point where we went to different schooling systems in apartheid South Africa, and in the black schools, sciences and mathematics were either disallowed or seriously de-emphasized. So we have a massive skills problem in the system. In addition to that, the economy of the country was primarily white, which meant that both the large corporations as well as the small and medium enterprises were primarily white. So there was a need for a big economic transformation of the system, but we also wanted to solve a water problem for our water resources. And the response to that came in this massive program called Working for Water. And Working for Water simultaneously needed to combine a very good science solution, which it did. It needed to have a very smart design with lots of social innovation. It managed to come up with that, and it had a very novel societal process of stakeholder buy-in for the program to work. And what we have today is probably one of the largest water-oriented public works programs in the world that does not involve the construction of pipelines or dams. And it has been usually successful. We have had significant stream flow improvements in many of our river systems. We've had the re-emergence of natural and indigenous vegetation. But perhaps more important than that, we have had the opportunity to improve the lives of greater than 20,000 people every year, both by providing jobs as well as creating businesses and skilling people for a new economy. And I think this is one of those successes where it started off as a water problem. It did eventually help solve that water problem, but in doing so, had an impact way, way beyond the water problem itself. The second example I want to put out is a little bit further away. And this is sometimes where science manages to make a big contribution completely by serendipity. Now, this is a picture of the Kashmir. This is one of the great water towers of the world. And as you know, is the subject of an immense conflict between two very large powers, India and Pakistan. And given the current cricket results, I know cricket's a bit foreign for Canada, we may have a view of this once again in the semi-finals. Now, the story here basically was this. India needs to provide power, and it needs to provide power to its northern regions, and it has a very big industrial program. And one of the ways it wants to contribute to that is to build a dam on the river Neelam and produce hydroelectricity from that dam. The net result, however, is that the downstream effect on Pakistan would not be good. So Pakistan objected to this dam, and it was in a stalemate, and the usual kind of stalemate between India and Pakistan. The science intervention was this. The government of Pakistan, and it doesn't matter which government this time, approached South Africa to examine something that we had devised. And it's a system called drift. And drift is a system to determine the ecological reserve in water and in water systems. And this is how the story went. And the story is a little longer than one slide. On the one hand, Pakistan said, we don't want any dam, in our system at all. India says, we want a dam, we're going to have a dam, we're going to build it on Indian territory, and the dam is going to be designed for the maximum hydroelectrical power output. And both parties threatened each other to go to the International Court of Arbitration. And the case that did go to the International Court of Arbitration, and the scientific input came from this ecological reserve model that we had developed at the Water Research Commission, and using a number of combination of practical measurements as well as a largely theoretical model, modeled out what the impact would be of various heights and designs of the dam. And what happened was the following, that the International Court of Arbitration said that there is a solid scientific technique to work out the impact, and we have to use it. And what the International Court of Arbitration did was it said that a dam could go ahead, but it now had to be redesigned in a manner that allowed the ecological flow going into Pakistan and the River Neelam to continue to be able to do so. And this is exactly what happened, and the dam is currently in progress. And what we had were three winners. Because the government of India said, we clearly want this because we're going to have a dam. It's not going to be as big as we originally planned. It's going to be less than half as big in height as we originally planned, but we're going to get the dam and we're going to get the hydroelectricity. The government of Pakistan said that they won because they managed to organize for a redesign of the dam. And of course, we all won because one of the great water towers of the world has now got its environment organized in such a way that the stream flow will ensure the continued development of that environment. So even sometimes in the water and the water research domain, we are able to make an impact that is very, very far away from what we originally designed. And part of the challenge that I think that we have for all of us is to continuously make these connections, because sometimes we're very linear about the way we look for impact. Part of the reason is that we have our own toolbox that guides us in this direction, but there is another reason. The other reason is that the people who compile our performance indicators have a very inflexible indicator set of what that impact should be. So there needs to be a dramatic expansion in all of these areas. So this is where I'm going to pause, and these are my initial thoughts on the matter with a couple of examples. And I'm looking forward to the discussion, but I couldn't leave you without some vistas of my hometown. I have to admit, it doesn't look like this in the winter time. This is from the springtime. Those are the beautiful jacaranda trees of Pretoria. So during September, when some of you will be visiting Pretoria, Pretoria will be purple. This is also one of the perpetrators that we are trying to get rid of in the Working for Water program, because this is an exotic alien that is a marvelous pump called the jacaranda tree. There's a view of the city bowl, and then maybe South Africa's biggest contribution to the history of the world, and that is Nelson Mandela. And when you visit, you'll have a chance to sit at his feet too, and I promise I will take your picture personally so you can put it on your Twitter account. Thank you very much indeed.